All right, chapter 3 is molecules of life. These are large molecules made up of, that make a lot of the biological cells functions. They help with making things for the cell and that kind of thing. So these are called the molecules of life. They're very, very large. Macro means large molecules. And most of these are organic compounds, that are molecules with a base of carbons covalently bonded together, and this is called the carbon skeleton. To fill out their outer shell electrons, as we talked about in chapter 2, they will connect other types of atoms or small little molecules together on this carbon chain to give different types of these organic molecules. If the organic molecule has only hydrogen attached to it, then this organic molecule is called a hydro. How about the hydrogens? Carbon. These are extremely strong. They're hard to break. When you do break them, though, they have a lot of chemical energy. So they release a lot of chemical energy. We utilize that, of course, in gasoline and other petroleum products. They're all hydrocarbons. All right? But for the most part, these biological organisms use other types of organic compounds. And there are, like I said, the hydrocarbons just have hydrogen attached to them, but some of these biological organic compounds will have other little molecules attached to it that give the particular molecules its identity. All right, and the more different functional groups, the more diversity of these organic compounds you're going to have. So the first one is called the hydroxyl group. It's an oxygen with a hydrogen attached to it. And these are found in sugars and alcohols. All right. So if you see a bunch of these on a carbon chain, you're going to think that it's some sort of sugar, more than likely, or an alcohol. If it has a nitrogen with hydrogens attached, then this group is called an amino group. And the amino group, when it's found on the carbon chain, indicates that it's probably part of an amino acid, and the amino acids are the building blocks for proteins. So if you change the location of a particular functional group, it changes the molecule. So that's how you get all this diversity in the molecules. Are these functional groups and where those functional groups are attached to the carbon chain. Now we call these organic compounds macromolecules. Macro mean large, all right? And these are also called the molecules of life that we started out with. And in molecular scale, they are gigantic. They are huge. DNA is a type of organic compound that during some time in the cell's life, you can actually see the DNA molecule. So that is a very large, you see it underneath the light microscope. Most of these are not, on the grand scale of things, are way smaller than what light microscopy can see. All right, so, but like I said, with DNA, you can actually see the molecule. Polymers are these macromolecules that are formed by adding similar, smaller organic molecules together to form big chains. These basic building blocks, the smaller ones, are called monomers. Mono means one, poly means many. So essentially, you're taking very small units and putting them together to make very large molecules. And that's mostly what we see in these macromolecules. So the living cells can make a vast number of these different polymers from just a few monomers. In fact, DNA, its complexity is there's only 4 building blocks. Right? They're the same building blocks for each species. It's just how they are arranged that gives each individual of each species their identity and their function and that kind of thing. The key to polymer diversity is the arrangement of those monomers, how they're put together. Even though a variety of polymers accounts for the uniqueness of each organism, all organisms are composed of the same monomers. All organisms have the same building blocks and use the same polymers, right? Now, there are a specific type of monomers there's specific types of chemical reactions that put the monomers together to form these big chains, which we now call polymers, right? And so the type of reactions that cause the formation of these big polymers is called dehydration synthesis, all right? That's the most important thing you need to know. I will show you how this works, all right? With the help of enzymes, the hydroxyl functional group of one monomer is cut off, and a hydrogen atom of the other monomer is cut off. Those two then come together to form H2O, right, as water. And when they do that, they have outer shells that are incomplete. So what will happen is these two monomers then will form a bond between them to fulfill their outer shell electrons. And now you have a 6-carbon chain instead of 2 3-carbon chains. And that's called dehydration synthesis, because to dehydrate is take out water, right? And so as a result of a dehydration synthesis, water is generated, all right? Hydrolysis is the complete opposite of this. The cell is a recycler. It recycles everything, okay? And so it needs, at some points, to break down these polymers and put them back as monomers so that they can be reused. All right, so essentially this is dehydration synthesis in reverse. You have water, breaks down into a hydrogen, and hydroxyl ion. With the help of enzymes, the bond is broken. As a result, you have a hydrogen ion attached to one end and a hydroxyl group attached to the other end. And now you have three carbon chains instead of one large 6 carbon chain. So hydrolysis is just the reverse of dehydration synthesis. A good example of how we would use or how life uses hydrolysis. Plants, especially trees, during the winter can't make their own food, right? And so what happens is that they store glucose as starch during the winter when they need a little energy. The starch is broken down and releases glucose in a process of hydrolysis. All right. So those are just the major general types of reactions that occur to help make polymers and then break down polymers to form, to release those monomers again. So there are 4 types or classes of macromolecules or molecules of life. All right. They're carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. We're going to look at each. The rest of the chapter, we're just going to look at these types. Carbohydrates are sugars. They are the most abundant biological molecules. In general terms, their uses are structural material. We'll see that one of them is a main fuel source molecule for cellular work. They are also stored forms of energy. And there are subclasses. There's monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. And we'll talk about each of those. So monosaccharides, mono meaning one, saccharum is sugar, saccharide, so it's one sugar unit. So that's the monomer of a carbohydrate. And some examples of these are ribose and deoxyribose. These are a part of the structure of RNA and DNA. And then there's glucose. Glucose is the major fuel source for the cell, energy source. It is the fuel that the cell runs on. Okay, glucose. And then fructose is fruit sugar. It's the sugar that you would tend to associate with an apple or orange or something like that. So monosaccharides, one sugar unit. Disaccharides, di means two. So disaccharides are 2 sugar units covalently bonded together, 2 monosaccharides. Some examples of these are lactose. Lactose is milk sugar. A lot of times babies don't tolerate lactose very well in milk, so they have to go on to soy for a little bit until their digestive tract can get used to it. Some people continue that allergy throughout their life, lactose intolerant, so they have to watch what kind of foods they eat, how much milk they consume, and use substitutes in most cases. Maltose is malt sugar associated with some grains, gives some brewery brewed beverages that sort of a little sugary taste to them. Sucrose is table sugar. It was the major sweetener for a long time, but is now being replaced by high fructose corn syrup. But sucrose comes from sugar cane and beets. So those are disaccharides. Some examples of polysaccharides include, and these are very, very long chains. Sometimes they're branched, but they can be just a straight long chain of monosaccharides. But there are 3 examples of these. Starch is the major plant energy storing polysaccharide. It's stored in the roots and other tissues. Starch, we have found out that it's not as good to eat as much starchy type foods as you can, because we don't get the glucose out of those very readily. And so when our body is digesting it, we end up storing a lot of that glucose as fat. So starch, major energy storing polysaccharide. You want to put a star by that one, because I think in your first exam you're going to have a multiple choice question about the plant energy storing polysaccharide. Cellulose is the plant's structural material, and it's found in the cell wall of a plant. It's the most abundant organic material or compound on the face of the earth. Actually, things like cows and horses cannot by themselves digest cellulose, but they have microorganisms that live in their digestive tracts that help with that. We can't very readily digest cellulose. We need cellulose in our diet because we use the term fiber, right, for cellulose, and it is small enough molecule that can go through capillaries and into the bloodstream, and it works like a little SOS pad to scrape out the plaque that might be in your veins and arteries. It also can help scour the digestive tract as it passes through. So cellulose is extremely important to our diet. Glycogen is like starch in animals. It's an energy storage polysaccharide. The body doesn't make a lot of it. It's stored in the liver. And so as you're doing exercise and you eliminate the glucose that is in your bloodstream, then it will start breaking glycogen down and releasing glucose into the bloodstream until that particular source is expired, and then your body turns to fat. So you really have to work out aerobically 20 to 22 minutes to get to the point, and every person's different, but get to the point where you're actually burning fat instead of just these either glucose or the glycogen. All right, so those are carbohydrates. Lipids are non-polar. They mostly consist of the carbon skeleton and hydrogen atoms. They are non-polar. That means they do not dissolve in water. We talked about water and its polarity in chapter 2. And so hydrophobic molecules are those that are water-fearing, and these lipids are that. All right, they do not mix or dissolve in water. You try to take oil and put it in water. You take a big glob and you try to mix it. It may make smaller globs, but it does not dissolve or mix in the water. The uses of lipids are main reservoirs for storage of energy, membrane components. They repel water, so they're on surface coatings, and then there are hormones, which are messengers. The subclasses, the subtypes of lipids are neutral fats. We call those triglycerides because they have 3 glycerol tails, so that's why they're called triglycerides. Phospholipids, lipids with a phosphate group attached to them. Waxes and steroids. The first type of lipid are neutral fats, the triglycerides, and they are energy storage molecules as well. They are actually 2 times more efficient than polysaccharides in storing energy. So the body, since glycogen is in fairly small amounts, the body tends to put the chemical energy that you get from the glucose, if you have abundance of it, and change it into triglyceride. These are stored in little cells called adipose cells. Just think of them as little country crops. When you're a small kid, these adipose cells are created, and they store energy and for development. All right. As you grow older and you consume food, if you can overconsume and don't have a lot of exercise, then you can still produce adipose cells, and they, if there's an overabundance of glucose, they'll start putting triglycerides into these little country crops, and all of a sudden, when you're 55, you look around and you got this roll around your belly, and you realize, oh, there are 2 things. I'm overeating 1, and 2, I'm not exercising. All right, so I'm not burning these up. You can't really get rid of adipose cells other than liposuction. If you were to go on diets and lose weight and exercise, and you get down to your goal, and then you decide, well, I've reached my goal now, I can go back to the way I was doing before. Those little adipose cells are there, they'll get filled back up, and you'll start gaining weight again. So it's important, it's a lifestyle change, really. If you're going to try to lose weight, and you do, you're successful with it, you have to keep that up. All right. Phospholipids are the major component of cell or plasma membranes. We will talk about that in chapter 5 more in depth. Waxes are surface coatings that repel water. Plants, like especially cacti, have this thick wax coating that keeps their water in the plant. If you are a roundworm and you live in the large intestine of a horse, let's say, a large intestine is a big vacuum cleaner. It sucks out water from your waste as it passes through. If you're living in there, you have to have a waxy coating so that your water doesn't get sucked out of you and you get shriveled up. All right. Cacti, the wax keeps the water in during the hot summer, sunny days. All right. Earwax is a type of lipid that its use is to most precisely direct the sound waves to your eardrum so that it vibrates. As it vibrates, your otic cranial nerve then interprets those vibrations and sends it to the brain and tells you, yeah, that was a car horn honking. All right. So waxes are important. Steroids are messengers, hormones. Most of those that are lipid-based deal with reproductive cycles and secondary sex characteristics like testosterone or estrogen. But they send signals to the body to help direct the body into doing certain activities. The next macromolecule or molecule of life are proteins, and these are large polymers that are composed of amino acids bonded together to form these polymers called polypeptides. So your monomer is an amino acid, and these amino acids form polymers, and then these polymers, these polypeptides, are then connected together to form the final protein structure. The classes of proteins are structural, so bone, and feather, and web silk for spiders and things like that. Those provides for support. Contractile proteins are those that provide muscular movement, allow for the elasticity of muscular action, so it contracts and expands. Storage proteins are, and a good example of this is ovalbumin, which is egg white, right? They store amino acids for later use. It's very important for a developing chick to have as many of the amino acids it needs to make all the proteins for development, because it can't, the mother cannot provide them once the egg is laid. So they have to have this storage of amino acids that allow them to develop into an adult, or at least a fledgling. Defensive. These proteins help fight infections. The antibodies are a good example here. These are proteins on T cells, immune cells that recognize things as not being a part of the normal fauna or flora in the body, and so they attack. Helps the T cells go and attack those types of cells that are not supposed to be there. Transport proteins. These move things around the body. Hemoglobin is a good example here. We talked about that when we talked about iron. Signal proteins, those are proteins that are hormones. Human growth hormone is a good example here of this type of protein. And then enzymes. Enzymes are proteins that speed up the rates of reactions without themselves getting involved in the process. And so if you watch rowing and in the Olympics, you'll see that the 8-man crew that is a long boat with 8 people in the boat, 7 of which are rowing, and then 1 who's not. 1 is there keeping cadence. So in order to go as fast as it can, the boat, the oars have to hit all at the same time and pull through the water at the same time, and then pull out of the water at the same time. And so enzymes speed up the rate of reaction, and the coxswain is the guy that on the boat that helps keep cadence, and that's exactly what the enzyme does in chemical reactions. All right.